Am I going to get banned from multiplayer? Well, the truth is, I'm not that worried about it. And if I'm being honest, I don't think the average player should be that worried either. Now, before you rush off to the comments to let me know just how wrong I am, I would like to encourage you to at least hear me out and watch the full video to better understand my position. Before we dive into this polarizing topic, I want you to know this is not something I really wanted to cover, mostly because there's been a high level of fear-mongering and misinformation surrounding this subject. It's highly likely that this video will be a bit different from other videos you may have watched on this same topic, but there is a good reason for that. I don't think I've ever seen this much fear in the Dreamlight Valley community before, and I've been in this community since the very beginning of early access. The entire goal and purpose of this video is to help alleviate some of that fear and correct some of that misinformation. Now, of course, I am pretty late on this topic, and for that I do apologize. Truth is, I've been having some health issues lately. I'm not gonna go off about all that right now. I'll just say I'm working through it, and I really appreciate your patience. Thanks for sticking with me. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. In today's video, we'll be covering several topics related to the multiplayer bans and flags. We'll discuss why GameLoft is taking these measures, how many players have been impacted, which accounts are at risk, and how you can avoid unnecessary flags. In the final chapters of this video, I'll do my best to provide clarity on some of GameLoft's terms of use, as some of these terms seem to be generating a high level of concern from the player base. To provide more clarity on this subject, the first topic we need to discuss is why these bans are happening. It's no secret that GameLoft has experienced its fair share of issues since multiplayer was introduced to Dreamlight Valley. Just a few months ago, modders had uncovered methods which allowed them to give away or sell premium items. House skins, Star Path rewards, premium decor, and more were cheaper to purchase on sites like eBay or Etsy as opposed to Dreamlight Valley's premium shop. However, it's not just premium items being sold, as players were able to turn to modders for star coins, mist, storybook magic, and in-game resources as well. Of course, some players celebrated these modifications. Cheaper premium items and endless resources seemed to be a big win for some within the Dreamlight Valley community. However, for many others, these developments were met with concern. The more modders were willing to push the envelope, the more likely it became that GameLoft would be forced to intervene. At the end of the day, the driving force behind GameLoft's recent ban waves has been largely motivated by money. As long as a handful of bad actors are willing to exploit Dreamlight Valley to make a quick buck, GameLoft will continue to pursue an aggressive stance against these parties. So this begs the question, if GameLoft's intent was to ban exploiters who are undermining their profit margins, why are countless innocent players being banned? To answer this question, I turned to my community in hopes of getting a real idea of just how many players have been impacted by this ban wave, and what I found was shocking, to say the least. Throughout the past week, I've spoken to thousands of players, always asking them the same question. Have you or anyone you've known personally been banned? The answer? No. Not a single person I spoke to out of thousands of players had actually been banned. Now, I want to be clear here, I am not saying 0 innocent players have been banned, and even one innocent account catching a ban is one too many in my eyes. All I'm trying to point out here is that these bans are nowhere near as common or prevalent as some would like for you to believe, and there's a few reasons the bad actors would want you to think the situation is far worse than it actually is. It goes without saying that you should question everything you see on the internet. If it doesn't come from a source you know and trust, take it with a grain of salt. For example, I've seen a few posts from individuals who have been banned, claiming they have never used mods or hacks. But would the individuals using mods to exploit Dreamlight Valley for profit even tell the truth? Look at all the hackers and modders we see in the competitive game space. Countless individuals using aimbots, wall hacks, and other advantages to fuel their gaming career, yet whenever they get called out, they simply deny the allegations. Again, I want to reiterate that I am not saying 0 innocent players have been banned. And I am not saying every banned account claiming to be innocent is actually guilty. I'm just trying to give you some food for thought on the overall numbers, as reality is not adding up or aligning with the fear-mongering we've seen around this topic. Keep in mind, modders and exploiters who have been profiting for months off of Dreamlight Valley's lack of anti-cheat security are going to push more fear. They need a majority of the player base on their side, calling for an end to these bans because without a pivot, their free ride will come to an end. To make matters worse, some content creators will attempt to capitalize on the ban wave with scary titles and thumbnails, as negative news typically reaches far more people and can bring in much more ad revenue. So again, I simply encourage you to keep these things in mind while exploring this sensitive topic. The next thing we'll need to discuss is flags. While I have yet to find a single banned player in my community, I have spoken to several individuals that have been flagged. Needless to say, these flags are far more common than the permanent bans and are also a big contributor to the fear surrounding the bans themselves. The first thing we'll touch on in this segment is a statement directly from GameLoft, courtesy of Mama Flash, a fantastic content creator in the Dreamlight Valley space and a member of my Twitch community. After receiving flags, Mama Flash reached out to GameLoft support, and this was their response. Kindly note that the system automatically generates messages and warnings regarding hacking and modding activity if a violation is suspected. Our security team is checking all cases to make sure everything works correctly and to confirm or deny any violation. If you did not violate anything, then nothing will be done to your account. Those messages only mean that the system noticed some activity. In a follow-up email, GameLoft specified that their system detects abnormal activity based on a set criteria, but unfortunately they cannot disclose specifics about individual accounts. Therefore, they cannot really identify what this abnormal activity is, which makes it hard to know exactly how to avoid future flags. And with each flag message stating continuation of these behaviors will result in a permanent ban from multiplayer, it's reasonable that individuals receiving these flags would indeed be worried. With that in mind, there are some key points within GameLoft's response that I find important to highlight. It seems these flag messages are built on an automated system and can indeed be sent out to completely innocent accounts. However, GameLoft also mentioned that their security team was working to review these cases to correctly confirm or deny that violations were taking place and that nothing would happen to your account if you were not in violation of GameLoft's user agreement. This alone serves to explain why I've seen several community members receive flags while not a single community member of mine has actually been banned. In my eyes, this reinforces the case that GameLoft is indeed reviewing these cases and not simply banning players left and right. After all, these ban waves seem to be motivated by a loss in profits from GameLoft, so why would they further disrupt profits by banning loads of innocent players? It simply doesn't add up. Unfortunately, the messaging within these flags is poorly designed, and it's no surprise that players who have received flags would be frightened by the poor choice of words. As of right now, the biggest problem I have with GameLoft's approach in this situation would be that the flagging system clearly needs to be adjusted to bring about a smaller margin of error. At the very least, GameLoft should be sending out follow-up messages after the security team determines there were no violations. A simple follow-up letter from GameLoft would do well to put innocent players at ease, and I see no reason for them to not be implementing this. So if you thought this whole video was just going to be pro GameLoft, hate to disappoint you, but that's not the case. They can and should be handling this differently, though that's not the primary point of this video. The purpose of this video is to help convince the average player that they should not be scared of using the multiplayer feature in light of the recent bans. The truth is, a majority of the players I spoke to who had been flagged did confess to utilizing mods or were in possession of modded items. With that in mind, many of these players did as GameLoft suggested and reached out to GameLoft's support. Within these messages, it became apparent to me that GameLoft did not want to outright ban these players, but rather give them a chance to uninstall their mods or remove modded items from their valleys. As for the innocent players who have received flags, I believe reaching out to GameLoft support is the best option. Like I stated previously, it is not in GameLoft's best interest to ban any players without sufficient evidence. Of course, if you have been flagged, you're likely still nervous, and I don't blame you. I'm hoping that GameLoft does more to refine this approach in the near future, to help put your minds at ease. The next chapter is going to discuss GameLoft's online conduct policies and their user agreement. These are the very things you need to be mindful of if you wish to avoid being caught up in these ban waves. When it comes to GameLoft's online policies, this is where most of the misinformation on this topic appears to run rampant. This portion of today's video will serve to quell some of that fear and attempt to explain GameLoft's policies, which appear to have been widely misinterpreted. We'll start things off with the most commonly misunderstood GameLoft policy centered around virtual items. Recently, one of my favorite Dreamlight Valley creators, known as Mr. Star and Sky, covered this topic. However, I believe he was mistaken about what a virtual item is, and I'll provide proof of that momentarily. For now, let's hear what Mr. Star and Sky had to say about the terms and conditions involving virtual items.
Number 15. Sublicensing, renting, leasing, selling, trading, gifting, or otherwise transferring your account or any virtual items associated with it to anyone. So basically, and all of this, you will immediately be banned if you're found to be participating in any one of these activities. So transferring or gifting virtual items, according to their terms of service, is a bannable offense. But that is the entire purpose of the whole multiplayer.
So according to Mr. Star and Sky, exchanging resources like dream shards or using multiplayer as intended is a bannable offense. But is this true? No, it's not. But before I debunk this, I'd like to clarify that I don't believe Star and Sky was intentionally fear-mongering or misleading his community. Like I stated earlier, he's one of my favorite Dreamlight Valley creators, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. The way I see it, he's simply a concerned player taking what he's reading and seeing at face value. In my eyes, he did absolutely nothing wrong, but he was missing some key information we'll discuss and provide now. The segment Star and Sky was referring to can be found in Section 4 of Dreamlight Valley's Terms of Use, specifically Section 4, Articles 15 and 16, which stated players were not allowed to sell, rent, lease, trade, or even gift virtual items. But what is a virtual item? Thankfully, Section 3 of Dreamlight Valley's Terms of Use provide a full explanation and definition to what a virtual item actually is. GameLoft defines virtual items as follows. Certain services may allow you to earn or purchase virtual currency for use in the services providing virtual in-game items and certain in-game benefits. In a nutshell, this means that virtual items are not basic in-game resources, but rather items that have been redeemed with in-game currency such as premium shop items and Star Path rewards. Section 4, Articles 15 and 16 merely prohibit the sale and exchange of these premium items or entire accounts. For example, if I were to quit playing Disney Dreamlight Valley one day, I may be inclined to sell my account on eBay. After all, I've got every Star Path item and most of the premium items, making my account rather valuable. And that's exactly what GameLoft seeks to prevent with these articles. They would rather have a new player purchase these items directly from them rather than obtain them through a third-party source or a player like myself. To summarize all of this, it is not against GameLoft's terms and conditions to exchange or trade in-game resources between players, meaning it is not a bannable offense. To further drive home the difference between virtual items and in-game resources, here's a direct quote from GameLoft themselves. The multiplayer experience is designed to enable players to share resources with one another, and this practice continues to be encouraged, provided that those resources were not obtained through actions that would violate the terms or end-user agreement. Notice how they did not refer to resources as virtual items in this post, and that's simply because the two have different definitions. Many players and creators simply weren't aware of the legal framework and definition in place for the term virtual items, and therefore were unknowingly misrepresenting these terms and conditions. So I hope this clear definition of virtual items and the statements that followed serve to put your mind at ease when it comes to using the multiplayer system as intended. Unfortunately, this is just one example of some of the misinformation or misunderstandings circulating around this subject. A recent petition, which was taken down a few days ago, accused GameLoft of banning players for simply using the multiplayer portal. Again, if this were truly the case, the number of banned accounts would have been much higher. Though, like I said, interestingly enough, the petition was taken down, and in its place was a simple statement. This petition has been deleted as GameLoft responded. They updated their terms of service to not being able to pick up in valleys not multiplayer use. That alone is okay for us. Okay, so I'm gonna skip focusing on the confusing grammar here, but I'm just gonna dive right into the misinformation. As of right now, there have been no recent changes to GameLoft's terms of service, and quote, picking up valleys in multiplayer use was never included in GameLoft's terms in the first place. What's more likely here is that the petition author could have received a cease and desist from GameLoft for misrepresenting the situation. Of course, I can't really confirm if that's true or not, but in my eyes, everything about this petition was a little sketchy. Claiming that players were being banned simply for using their portals is entirely misleading. While the bans are centered around multiplayer engagement, GameLoft has been clear that the bans are intended to target individuals failing to honor the end-user agreement, and accessing the multiplayer portal in no way, shape, or form violates that agreement. Again, remember, there are a lot of bad actors in this space. Countless individuals have been using mods, hacks, and multiple accounts to undermine GameLoft and turn a profit for themselves. Let me ask, do you know who is likely to complain the quickest, the loudest, and with the most righteous indignation? The fraudsters themselves, of course. The very people looking to exploit the system are going to push back the hardest against these ban waves. Unfortunately, the fear spread by these bad actors has led to countless innocent players wondering if they too will be banned from multiplayer. But throughout my research, the numbers seem to prove otherwise. Again, nobody in my community has been banned from multiplayer despite the fact that many players have been flagged. Though, as we discussed, the flags alone can be quite scary and can even deter players from engaging in any multiplayer activity whatsoever. So what can players do to prevent these flags and warnings? To answer this question, let's circle back to GameLoft's recent response to the ban controversy and read a bit further into it. The multiplayer experience is designed to enable players to share resources with one another, and this practice continues to be encouraged, provided that those resources were not obtained through actions that would violate the terms of service or the end-user license agreement. It is advisable to avoid engaging with individuals or communities who offer in-game resources that may have been acquired through exploitation or modifying the game. We recommend only participating in valley visits with players you trust. If you believe you may have inadvertently traded with such individuals, or if you think you have been warned in error, please contact support for assistance. Now, I know a lot of people are huge fans of treasure valleys, which are obviously modded valleys, duplicating tons of items and providing them to the player base. And whether you agree or disagree with the presence of treasure valleys is entirely irrelevant in this case. At the end of the day, any player or person that is utilizing mods to duplicate items is violating the end user agreement. So my advice is, if you need more resources, if you're in need of iron or gold or dream shards, interact with fellow players and community members as intended by GameLoft. When the multiplayer feature was implemented, it was designed in a way that players would be able to share amongst themselves the resources they had in abundance, and this practice is still heavily encouraged by GameLoft. But what was not intended was for a handful of modders to create treasure valleys, with many of the valleys in question being designed for profit. Now, I'm not saying all treasure valleys are like that, but there are many. Now, while we are on the topic of treasure valleys, another well-known point of contention following these bans seems to center around what I consider to be a false narrative. One comment I found stated the following: "The problem with the bans is that while there are players knowingly breaking the end-user agreement and terms of service, they don't seem to be the players being banned." Notice how this player stated that these violators don't seem to be the players being banned. And to that I say, looks can be deceiving. Think about what we discussed earlier. Are these bad actors truly going to be honest about their bans? Most likely not. Not to mention, I've seen plenty of evidence to the contrary. Out of the thousands of legit players I've engaged with, nobody in my community has been banned, despite several people being flagged. All the while, I couldn't help but notice a sharp decline in treasure valleys on Twitch. It's also worth mentioning that just because you still see treasure valleys and websites like this in operation, it does not mean they haven't been impacted. What's more likely is that they're just working around these bans. These exploiters could possibly be using VPNs and purchasing the game under a new account or name to continue their exploitation for profit. When it comes to catching and stopping these bad actors, it's very much a cat and mouse game for GameLoft. In closing, I truly don't believe the average player should be concerned or worried about the bans, and to drive this point home, I want you to consider this. I make a living creating content, and Dreamlight Valley is one of my biggest fixations and focuses for this endeavor. If I were to get banned, it would impact way more than how I spend my free time. It would impact my very livelihood. Yet I am not scared or worried in the slightest. In fact, I hosted a stream last week where I invited several players to my valley to exchange resources, and none of us received a single flag. At the end of the day, players using multiplayer as intended are not at risk of being banned. Even if you were to catch a flag for unknowingly receiving duped or modded items from a player that was violating the user agreement, you can resolve this issue simply by reaching out to support. I've even seen some players who were utilizing mods forgiven by GameLoft so long as they intended to honor the user agreement moving forward. If you or somebody you know has received a flag and you're worried, I've included a link down below in the video description to contact GameLoft support. Alternatively, you can also scan this QR code to easily reach out to GameLoft. This QR code can be found in your help menu below the terms of service. As I stated when this video began, this isn't really a topic I wanted to cover, but after seeing just how much fear was circulating around these bans, I felt compelled to share my thoughts and hopefully dispel some of the fear and misinformation. Please keep in mind that I'm not in full agreement with the way GameLoft has been handling this situation, and I think a bigger focus on transparency and communication would have made this situation far less frustrating for several players. I just wanted to express why I'm not worried and why I feel you should not be worried either. If you found today's video helpful, informative, or simply entertaining, please do me a very big favor and press that like button. Also, consider subscribing for more Disney Dreamlight Valley and gaming content. If you would like to catch more of my content, you can find me live on Twitch Monday through Friday. Link to my Twitch channel and Discord server can be found in the video description down below. As always, thank you so much for your time today, and I wish you a ban-free future in your Dreamlight Valley adventures.